It's a question of whether we should privatize the normal water supply for the population, and there are two different opinions on the matter. The one opinion, which I think is extreme, is represented by the NGOs, who bang on about declaring water a public right. That means that as a human being you should have a right to water. That's an extreme solution. The other view says that water is a foodstuff like any other, and like any other foodstuff it should have a market value.
This is a direct quote from Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, the former CEO of Nestle. Now, to be fair, he claims this quote was taken out of context and he retracted the statement a bit later. Personally, I'm not really buying this apology, but I'll post the statement in the comments so you can read it and judge for yourself. Now, when I first heard this quote, I thought to myself, wow, these capitalists literally don't even think water is a human right anymore. What's next? Are they going to try to charge people for breathing oxygen next? And I thought to myself, well, this is just an absurd exaggeration, right? Surely this would never happen in real life, right? And then I saw this tweet from the exact same Nestle company.
Oxygen comes from trees, many of which grow on private land, so private landowners ought to be able to charge.
Okay, so it turns out I got baited, and this was a parody tweet from a fake account. And as much as I think they're an evil company, I'm not going to put words in their mouth or misrepresent what they said, as I sure wouldn't want anyone doing that to me either. This did lead me, however, to think there probably are some capitalist CEOs out there who do legitimately believe this and will call you a communist for wanting to breathe air for free. This is because they literally want to privatize everything to the point where they literally call everyone and everything they don't like a communist now. Fair wages are communist. Affordable housing is communist. Universal healthcare is communist.
Wait, one small problem. Literally every developed country in the world besides the US has universal healthcare. So that would mean literally every developed country is communist.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's exactly what they'll say next, except one slight issue with that is that if every other developed country is communist, that would mean communism actually has worked every time it's been tried, which completely goes against their idea that
for 1,000 years, communism has not worked. Communism or the concept of communism has not worked.
Interesting, because Karl Marx actually founded communism in 1848, and I'm no math genius, but I'm pretty sure 2025 minus 1848 is less than 1,000. I mean, literally everything these corporate shills don't like is communist at this point. I mean, we're literally at a point now where communism can literally time travel back 1,000 years ago and make things communist before communism even existed. And now we're about to get to a point where literally air itself, yes, I'm talking about the very oxygen you and I are breathing right now, is communist. If we don't seriously fight back against these delusional boomers and corporate shills and all their delusional logic right now, I honestly kind of fear we could get to a dystopian future one day where we're literally sitting there having to pay for every breath we take. So if we want to avoid this, which I'm pretty sure all of us do, the fight for our future begins right here and right now. I recently made several videos exposing what's, in my opinion, the biggest scam in human history. The fact that we have to pay such insanely high rent prices to live on the land of the earth that was created for free. Boomers like to say you're entitled for wanting to live rent-free, but facts and logic tell a totally different story. Think about it logically for a second. An iPhone costs money and it costs human labor to create. So therefore, it does make sense that you should have to expend human labor and pay money to get one. Land, however, was created totally for free billions of years before humans even existed. It didn't cost any money or human labor to build or create the land in the first place, so it makes literally zero sense that you have to spend your money and human labor to live on it. Part 1. Beyond the capitalist lies. There are three main recurring capitalist lies I always see in the comments whenever I make the case that land is free, therefore we shouldn't be paying for something that's free. You're going to soon see why these three lies are so dangerous, because literally every argument they make for why we should be forced to pay for land can equally be applied to justify their next dystopian plan of forcing us to pay for oxygen. And this is why it's so important to totally debunk and dismantle them before they literally start charging us for every breath we take and calling us communists for wanting free air. Lie number 1. Nothing is free, not even in nature. This is Tacopia, a tropical, paradise-like island of the Solomon Islands. To this day, the Tacopians maintain a very chill, fisher-forager lifestyle. The natural tropical climate of Tacopia means that fruits, like bananas and coconuts, grow abundantly everywhere in nature, literally for free. Food shortages are completely unheard of here, despite the fact that they barely even practice agriculture. Free banana trees grow everywhere. Free coconuts literally just drop to the ground, ready to eat. The only thing that arguably takes some work is the extensive fishing they do, but this has become such a fun part of their tradition that they don't even describe it as work at this point. They live freely off the abundant, free, natural resources of the earth. Before capitalism and industrialization swept the world, a lot of places like Tacopia existed. The Calusa Indians used to occupy what we know today as Florida for thousands of years. They lived very well off the free resources of the earth. Just like the Tacopians, Florida's tropical climate meant that bananas, coconuts, berries grew everywhere abundantly and naturally for free. They didn't even have to practice agriculture at all and still viably sustain themselves for thousands and thousands of years. Anthropological evidence, along with modern day field research across many different hunter-gatherer tribes throughout different eras and locations, have all reported back several consistent, strikingly common similarities. Hunter-gatherers were much taller on average than early farmers, in many cases even taller than modern humans. They had perfect jawlines, straight teeth, and great health indicators. Scientists in Catawba, another hunter-gatherer tribe that still exists to this day, have found that they have literally 0 recorded cases of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and the many plethora of health issues we experience in modern society today. I'm not talking about near 0 or next to 0. I'm talking about literally 0, not even 1. What this all tells us is that contrary to the capitalist lie that nothing is free, the scientific evidence actually tells us that literally everything was free in its base form in nature. Free rent in the form of the free land of the earth. Free food in the form of abundant fruits and vegetables that grew everywhere. Free healthcare in the form of the natural, inherent healthy lifestyle of hunter-gatherers. The reason these things don't appear to be free today is because capitalists were the ones who put it behind a paywall to begin with. Reports say that we've altered anywhere between 70 to 97% of the Earth's land today, which is why you can't live like a hunter-gatherer anymore, even if you wanted to. Now, none of this is to say that modern society is all bad or that we should all return to the hunter-gatherer life. I mean, if you want to work a 9 to 5 in a modern industrialized society and live a modern lifestyle, more power to you. I promise you, I won't stop you. But what you don't have the right to do is to force me to work as a slave under the false pretense that nothing is free, not even in nature. No, the actual scientific evidence shows that literally everything we needed to live decent, healthy lives was abundantly available everywhere in nature, which proves your entire capitalist premise to be horseshit. Hey guys, we set out on a mission during the summer to take down the biggest, most vile Gen Z hater, the Angry Guy. A straight up horrible, horrible human being who hates Gen Z so much he even celebrates them dying. Thanks to you, we've gained a ton of ground on him over the summer, and we've set a new goal to surpass him in subscribers and defeat him once and for all by the end of the year. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest, most evil, Final boss Gen Z hater. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Line number 2. Anything that requires the labor of another human is not a human right. So I've seen this comment floating around a couple of times as an excuse to deny people healthcare, housing, and food. First of all, as you just saw, in the context of history and nature, healthcare, housing, and food were indeed free and did not require the labor of another human being at all. But even in the context of the modern world we live in, this argument is so incredibly false and easy to debunk. Just about every country in the world, whether they're liberal or conservative, has a police force and fire department that's funded by taxpayer public dollars and not the individual. This is because we recognize the right to be safe from physical harm as a universal human right that everybody deserves, whether they're rich or poor, whether they can afford it or not. Nobody wants a dystopian future where an axe murderer is chasing you down the street and you have to call a private police company and pay them a certain amount of money to come save you. Not only does this require the labor of another human being, there's a good case to be made that it requires the highest form of labor, as law enforcement literally has to risk their lives in order to save you in the case of an emergency. And yet, despite this, we still universally recognize it as a human right that every human being deserves, whether they're rich or poor. Line number 3, we have to pay for land because otherwise we'd all kill each other over it. Now, allow me to gloriously debunk perhaps the most common incorrect rebuttal I always get in the comments when I make this point. But we all should be forced to pay to live on the land right now because otherwise, before this, people were a bunch of noble savages brutally slaughtering each other, fighting for land before we decided to pay for it. Now, to be fair, unlike the other 2 lies, this usually isn't a bad faith dishonest argument, at least. It's more just a totally scientifically illiterate opinion of someone who gets their whole worldview from caveman movies and video games instead of actual scientific evidence. But I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking this, as I kind of used to believe this as well before I really researched the science behind it. The actual anthropological evidence shows that prehistoric hunter-gatherer tribes were not nearly as violent as we once thought, and by some metrics, they're even less violent than us. And there are several no-brainer logical reasons behind this. First off, hunter-gatherers lived in small tribes of only around 20 to 50 people. This meant that they had to be a lot more careful and calculated before going to war, as losing even 2 or 3 of your best hunters could spell doom for the entire tribe. We also have to consider the fact that there were far less of them in general, and yet the world was the same size as it is now. This means they were far more spread out and far less likely to encounter each other in general, let alone be able to start a war. And yeah, transportation technology wasn't even good enough back then for them to start mass wars across long distances, even if they wanted to. When you account for population differences, violent death statistics back then are around the same as they are today. So this means that the overwhelming majority of hunter-gatherers lived off the land of the earth totally for free and never had to fight a war in their entire lives. Now, everything I just said is more circumstantial evidence based on common sense and deductive reasoning more than anything else. But there's great scientific hard evidence to back this up as well. The anthropologist Douglas Fry wrote a fantastic book called War, Peace, and Human Nature, where he does a fantastic job exposing the truth with hard scientific evidence. He brings in several other well-respected anthropologists, such as Brian Ferguson, Raymond Kelly, and Richard Wrangham, who all reach the same conclusion based on their own separate anthropological research. For about 95% of our existence, humans lived as hunter-gatherers, and during this time, evidence from dozens of foraging sites, past and present, show that organized warfare was either rare or totally non-existent. This isn't to say that physical conflicts never happened, but when they did, they were more isolated personal fights and not large-scale organized war. In the book, Douglas Fry describes how he conducted a cross-cultural study of 21 nomadic forager societies and found no evidence of group-on-group warfare in the overwhelming majority of cases. He makes the case that the archaeological record before 10,000 years ago is almost completely devoid of evidence of warfare. No mass graves, no fortifications, no weapons designed solely for the sake of killing humans. These archaeological markers of large-scale organized violence only really occur after the advent of agriculture. And this makes sense when you think about it from a logical standpoint. Hunter-gatherers didn't store or accumulate food resources. They operated on a pure day-to-day basis. There's not really even a point to wage organized war and territorial conquest when there's no resources to be taken in the first place. Now, I found this really interesting because a few months ago I read another famous article from a totally different but equally well-respected anthropologist, Jared Diamond, who essentially came to the exact same conclusion when he made the case that agriculture was the biggest mistake in all of human history for the exact same reason, based on all his years of extensive anthropological research. When so many different anthropologists with no relation or knowledge of each other all seem to come to the exact same conclusion, you know it's definitely likely to be true. This is on top of the fact that, again, it all just makes sense from a pure common sense standpoint as well. Conclusion. So, as you can see, land, food, oxygen, and countless other resources on Earth were objectively and scientifically created totally 100% for free, contrary to the horseshit lies capitalists spew. Which is why, thankfully, we get to breathe the air for free without having to pay for it. But in order to keep this right, we can't take it for granted, and we must begin the ideological fight for our freedoms against these capitalist corporate shills. With the recent wake of Zohran Mamdani's win in New York, there's been a huge resurgence in the popularity of communism and socialism in the West. And there's also been a massive resurgence in Red Scare propaganda from capitalists to try and counter that. Now, I'm no communist or socialist myself, but what I will say is this. Whatever Red Scare tactics they try to come up with, nothing sounds remotely as scary as the dystopian future capitalists want to push us towards. All this talk about bread lines in the Soviet Union, no food in the grocery stores. First off, it's not like food shortages haven't happened in capitalist countries either. There were plenty of soup lines during the Great Depression, which was a direct result of the excesses of capitalism. But whatever they tell you happened under communist countries, literally nothing sounds scarier than a future where you have to pay a private corporation for every breath you take. A future where literally oxygen is privatized because capitalists are so adamant about privatizing everything for profits. It might sound ridiculous and far-fetched at first, but as you just saw, every argument capitalists use to deny you housing and food as a human right can equally be applied to oxygen as well. And given that's how their logic and their capitalist brains operate, I think it is imperative we thoroughly debunk these capitalist lies before these capitalists literally put oxygen behind a paywall too, as they've done with everything else. It's perhaps all best summed up by this quote from R.D. Hale. No food, no power. Brutal police, corrupt officials, electioneering, controlled media, crackdown on protests, no meaningful opposition, and no private property for the working class. Literally everything they warned us would happen under communism is happening under capitalism. So yeah, as you can see, this is exactly why it's so imperative we begin the ideological fight for our freedoms today. If there's any generation capable of doing that, it's definitely Gen Z, because as I talk about in this video right here, they're literally the only generation with any balls at this point. You're definitely going to want to check this out if you like this video. So yeah, click the link right here. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.